Okay, everyone, welcome to the deep dive. You know that feeling, right? That tightening in your chest when you see a math problem just staring back at you, or maybe you're thinking about an upcoming test and you get that overwhelming pressure feeling. Well, you're here because you want to cut through all the noise and really understand what's going on with that kind of anxiety, get some surprising insights, and feel truly informed without totally overloading your brain. And that's what we're doing today.
Yeah, so in this deep dive, we're going straight to the heart of this topic. We're going to be talking about this huge meta-analysis that was published in the Educational Psychology Review. This study looked at data from over 900,000 people across 177 different studies, which is amazing.
Wow, that's a lot of people.
Right. So their goal, and our goal today, is to try to understand how anxiety and actual math performance are all connected. We're going to break down what all this research tells us about these anxieties and how they affect you.
Okay, so before we get too far, let's make sure we're all on the same page. When we talk about math anxiety and test anxiety, what exactly do we mean according to this study? I mean, it might seem obvious, but I bet there's more to it than just not liking math or tests.
Totally. So math anxiety, or MAA, it's not just about finding algebra boring or whatever.
Hmm.
It's defined as those really negative feelings.
Yeah.
That stress and worry that come up when you're dealing with anything related to math,
Right.
whether it's in school or even just in your everyday life, like trying to figure out a tip or splitting a bill.
Oh, yeah.
And it's surprisingly
Hmm.
common. The study says that across 65 countries, about a third of students said they feel helpless when they have to solve a math problem.
Wow.
And get this, even when you take into account things like gender and someone's socioeconomic background, math anxiety still explains a significant 14% of the variation in math scores in developed countries.
Okay, so 14% is a lot.
It is.
That's huge. So that really shows how much of an impact it can have. Okay, so what about test anxiety? I think we've all had those moments before. A big exam, racing heart, sweaty palms. So what's the more official definition of test anxiety that the study uses?
Right. So test anxiety, or TA, is that specific type of anxiety that shows up in academic situations where you're being evaluated, like exams, quizzes, any kind of formal assessment.
Yeah.
And the study says that it has two main components. There's the mental side, which is all those worries and negative thoughts you're having. And then there's the physical side, like you said, those bodily reactions.
Uh-huh.
Your heart racing, sweating, feeling nauseous, things like that.
Right, right.
It's also really common. Estimates suggest that something like 16% of people report having high levels of test anxiety, and another 15% experience it so severely that it actually prevents them from showing what they know.
So both math anxiety and test anxiety sound like experiences we'd rather avoid, obviously. But are they totally separate things, or is there some overlap?
Yeah, there's definitely some overlap. The study points out that both math anxiety and test anxiety share some key elements, like they both involve a fear of failure, right?
Right.
That worry that you won't do well.
Right.
And they also both involve a fear of negative judgment for not performing well. And they share some of those cognitive and physiological symptoms like the racing heart and feeling uneasy.
Makes sense.
But it's important to remember that while they have these overlaps, this particular meta-analysis is looking at how each type of anxiety uniquely impacts your performance in math.
Okay, so we've got a good understanding of what we're talking about. Now let's get to the big question. What's the overall effect of these anxieties on how well people actually do in math?
Yeah, so this is where the main findings of the study get really interesting. They found a significant negative correlation between both types of anxiety and how well people perform in math. For math anxiety, the correlation was R equals negative 0.37.
Okay.
And for test anxiety, it was R equals negative 0.23. So what's interesting here is that the negative correlation is stronger for math anxiety. Just a quick reminder, a correlation of -1 would be like a perfect negative relationship,
Uh-huh.
whereas one thing goes up, the other always goes down. So these numbers, negative 0.30 and negative 0.23, they show a definite tendency for math performance to be lower when anxiety is higher.
Right.
And the closer to -1, the stronger that link is.
Got it.
So what this suggests is that feeling anxious specifically about math has a more powerful negative effect on your math skills than just feeling anxious about tests in general.
Which makes sense, right? If you're like specifically worried about the math itself, that could really mess with your ability to solve problems. So the study also looked at different types of math. I mean, we all know that doing like basic arithmetic is different from doing more complex word problems.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The researchers knew that math isn't just one big thing, so they broke it down into different types, like applied math, which involves more complex skills like solving word problems or using formulas in real-world situations.
Well,
There's arithmetic, which is like the basic calculations, adding, subtracting, and all that.
yep.
Then there's your overall math grade, which usually reflects a mix of different math skill,
Uh-huh.
and then just basic numerical knowledge, like being able to compare numbers.
Okay, so did math anxiety affect performance in all these areas equally?
That's a good question.
Hmm.
So this is where it gets really interesting. They found that basic knowledge tasks, like quickly figuring out which of two numbers is bigger, actually showed the weakest connection to math anxiety, with a correlation of R equals negative 0.22.
Okay.
But the other types of math, applied math, arithmetic, and overall math grade, all had more substantial negative correlations, ranging from about negative 0.25 to negative 0.31.
Interesting.
So it seems like the more involved and complex the math task, the stronger the negative impact of math anxiety tends to be on how well you do.
So if you're someone who gets anxious about math, it's probably going to affect you more when you're trying to do those tougher multi-step problems.
Right.
Okay, so what about test anxiety across these different types of math? Did it show a similar pattern?
Yeah, so a similar trend seemed to be there for test anxiety, where the negative correlation was a bit stronger for advanced math. But the researchers said that this pattern wasn't statistically significant as a moderator,
Okay.
which could be because there weren't enough studies that specifically looked at how test anxiety affects performance across these very specific types of math tasks.
Gotcha.
So while there was like a hint that test anxiety might also have a bigger effect on more advanced math, the evidence wasn't as strong as it was for math anxiety.
Okay, so now I want to talk about something that I think a lot of people have opinions about. This idea that girls are just naturally more anxious about math than boys.
Yeah.
What did this huge study find when it comes to gender differences?
This is a really important point to address, and this meta-analysis gives us some good insight. So, contrary to what a lot of people might think, gender was not found to be a significant factor in how math anxiety or test anxiety relate to math performance.
So that's really interesting.
In other words, while the correlation between anxiety and performance was a bit stronger for females, the overall impact of math anxiety and test anxiety on how well someone does in math is actually pretty similar for both genders.
But I feel like you often hear that girls tend to report feeling more anxious about math.
You're right, some research does suggest that females, on average, might report higher levels of math anxiety, and that this difference might even increase as they get older.
Okay.
But the key takeaway here is that this doesn't necessarily mean that their anxiety has a bigger impact on their math performance compared to males.
Right. Okay.
The strength of the connection between anxiety and performance seems to be very similar. The researchers did point out that not all the studies they looked at provided data broken down by gender.
Yeah.
So more research specifically on this would be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. So while there might be some differences in like the amount of anxiety experience, the impact on your actual math score is probably going to be similar whether you're male or female. What about how these anxieties change as we get older? Does age play a role in that relationship?
It definitely does. The study found that age was a significant factor when it came to math anxiety. The negative link between math anxiety and math performance was a bit stronger in children compared to adults.
Okay.
And this difference became even clearer after the researchers accounted for potential biases in the studies that focused on adults.
So it sounds like for younger students, feeling anxious about math might have a slightly bigger impact on their performance than it does for adults.
That's what the findings seem to suggest, yeah. However, when they looked at test anxiety age, didn't really make a difference in its relationship with math performance, although there were some trends suggesting that the connection might be stronger in older students.
Okay.
It's also worth noting that past research on when math anxiety first pops up and how it changes over time has been pretty inconsistent. So this meta-analysis gives us a more reliable overview.
Okay, so now I want to talk about an idea that comes up a lot in research on math anxiety, which is that it might interfere with working memory. Like that mental space we use to hold and work with information when we're solving problems. Did this massive study have anything to say about that connection?
It did. The researchers found a weak but statistically significant negative correlation between math anxiety and overall working memory.
Okay.
Interestingly, this connection was there regardless of whether the working memory task involved words or spatial information,
Right.
or if it was testing short-term memory or the more active manipulation of information.
Okay.
They also found a similar weak negative correlation between test anxiety and working memory, although there weren't as many studies looking specifically at that. And they suggested that the type of material you're working with, whether it's verbal or visual, might play a bigger role in how test anxiety affects working memory.
Okay.
So, verbal working memory involves holding on to and working with like spoken or written information,
Mm-hmm.
while spatial working memory is about visual stuff and location-based information.
Got it. So, but here's the really important question. Does this connection between anxiety and working memory explain why anxiety can hurt math performance? Is it like anxiety is taking up your mental RAM and leaving less space for you to actually do the math?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's exactly what the researchers wanted to figure out. They did something called a mediation analysis, and what they found is actually a bit surprising. So they confirmed that working memory does have a relationship with both anxiety types and with math performance.
Okay.
But the indirect effect, meaning the effect of math anxiety or test anxiety on math performance through its impact on working memory, was found to be super small in one of their analyses.
Oh.
In another analysis, which used a slightly different approach to look at more of the data, they did find a statistically significant indirect effect, but it was still really tiny in practical terms.
So it sounds like while anxiety and working memory are definitely connected, and we know working memory is important for doing math, that's not really the main way that anxiety is bringing down math scores.
Right? It seems that way. And that's kind of a surprising twist on a pretty popular theory.
Yeah, totally.
The researchers even mentioned that these pretty weak correlations between how anxious people say they are and how they do on working memory tasks raise some interesting questions about the whole idea of cognitive interference.
Right.
That theory that anxiety basically clogs up your mental workspace with worries.
Uh-huh.
It seems like it might be more complicated than that.
Okay. So lastly, the study directly compared math anxiety and test anxiety to see which one has a stronger link to math performance. We talked earlier about how math anxiety seemed to have a stronger overall correlation, but did they actually test that head-to-head?
They did. So in an additional analysis, they found that math anxiety does indeed have a significantly stronger correlation with math achievement than test anxiety. However, the difference in the strength of that connection was pretty small. So this really supports the idea that while feeling anxious about tests in general can definitely have an effect, the anxiety that's specifically connected to math is more directly and strongly linked to how well you do in math.
Makes sense.
The researchers proposed that maybe general anxiety and test anxiety could be like broader risk factors that make you more likely to develop that specific math anxiety, which then has a bigger direct impact on your math abilities.
Okay, so let's summarize all of this for our listeners. What are the main takeaways from this deep dive into this huge meta-analysis?
Sure. So the big picture is this.
Oh.
Both math anxiety and test anxiety are real problems that can negatively affect your math performance. But it looks like math anxiety has a stronger grip. The type of math task you're doing also matters. More complex math seems to be more strongly linked to math anxiety.
Got it.
And when it comes to gender, the impact of anxiety on math performance is likely to be similar for males and females, even if the actual experience of anxiety might be different. Age also plays a role, with math anxiety potentially having a slightly stronger negative effect on children than adults.
Uh-huh.
And while working memory is definitely connected to both anxiety and math skills, it doesn't seem to be the primary reason why anxiety makes your math performance worse.
Right.
And finally, it seems that being anxious specifically about math is a much stronger predictor of how well you'll do in math than just being anxious about tests in general.
So it's definitely a complex picture with a lot of interconnected factors. But hopefully this deep dive has get you a much clearer understanding of how math anxiety and test anxiety work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it leaves us with this really important question to think about. Given that math anxiety is so strongly and directly linked to math performance and seems to develop and potentially worsen over time, what are the best ways to intervene early on? I mean, not just to reduce anxiety, but
Right.
really focus on creating positive math experiences and building a strong foundation in math right from the start.
Right.
That's something that we should all be giving a lot of thought to.
Yeah, absolutely. Food for thought for sure. And on that note, thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Catch you next time.